This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.
Can I welcome members to our committee meeting this afternoon. Joining us in the room this afternoon is Emma Sheeran, Roderick Delargry and Pat Sheehan. Can I welcome members who are joining us remotely? And we have John Stewart joining us remotely. I have received apologies from Alex Easton, Trevor Lunn and Christopher Stolford. Have we had any other apologies? Not to date. Okay. I have a number of items of Chair's business. So I'll move into a few of them now at the minute. I've had a number of representations in relation to mother and baby institutions and historical institute abuse of children in care since the last committee meeting. So Rosetta Trust has been in contact with me to express two concerns. The first was that they're actually worried about the comments of Jeffrey Donaldson about the possibility of the Assembly and the Executive being brought down before the end of the mandate, and obviously the implications that that may have on the apology to victims and survivors. So there's real concern about that. So I propose that we pass this concern on to the Executive Office on behalf of the Rosetta Trust. And secondly, the Rosetta Trust has also expressed their concern about who is not being consulted in the redress review, and they have specifically indicated two parties that have conducted in-depth engagement with victims and survivors, and they are Amnesty International and Professor Patricia Lundy of Ulster University. So can I propose on behalf of the committee that we pass this concern again on to the Executive Office and ask that these two parties be included in the redress review consultation?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Item number 2 of Chair's business. I've been contacted by Ewan Duffy, a survivor of the Mother and Baby Institution, in relation to a meeting that I previously had with Queen's University in connection with the bodies that were received by Queen's for anatomical research and teaching. So I met with Queen's University several weeks ago just to really try and get up to speed just what the situation was in relation to donations. Specifically, Mr Duffy was clearly hurt and angry over the history that is surrounding this, and members will note in our papers on pages 8 to 33 of the pack there is a list of donations that have been received by Queen's University and some information in regard to the context of it, but it is very scant information that we have in an historical context. In my own belief, following that meeting with Queen's, I think that Queen's need to consider maybe a public statement to explain the historic contents and events and perhaps consider an apology to the families. There's a strong wish from Mr Duffy that the hospitals, as well as the institutions that provided bodies to Queen's, will undertake a thorough review of their records to determine if other bodies were gifted to Queen's and the Queen's itself has not been able to find records in relation to this. As there has been many doubts expressed about the accuracy of Queen's records, and those doubts have been expressed by Queen's themselves, it would perhaps be appropriate for Queen's to subject itself really to an external audit of the relevant records to determine if any additional information can be found that might either identify additional donated bodies or else confirm that the information provided by Queen's is not only accurate but also complete, or else as complete as possibly can be given the passing of time. It also, I think, would be helpful if Queen's could explain the background of the arrangements for anatomical research and whether any payments were made, and if so, by whom and to whom. I'm particularly concerned in relation to babies' bodies that have been donated, and you will see from the pages, the multiple pages that we have received, that babies have been donated from one institution, and it was Thorndale. Not a vast number on that list that we have at the moment, but again, I don't know how complete it is. But you will also see that the bodies and donations are coming from institutions, but they're adult bodies from institutions. We just don't know what the consent mechanism, who consented for these bodies to be handed over to Queen's, and we really need to get a handle on that. I know with the passing of time, procedures and ways of doing this are very, very transparent and methodical now. In the past, it wasn't. And you can see from the data that we have received, most of these donations were made from workhouses, institutional, asylums, etc. Just who consented. And when we talk about the babies as well, did the mothers give consent for these bodies to be handed over for research purposes to Queen's, or was it the institutions themselves, and why did that happen? So there's a lot of questions that we really need answered, and Queen's need to provide that in a public forum as well. But it's not just Queen's. There's also, the institutions, as I've said, and the hospitals, including the Mater Hospital. Mr. Duffy has also would like to know if the cemetery records have been fully and accurately inspected in relation to the disposal of bodies from institutions and hospitals. My understanding from the conversations that I've had with Queen's is whilst they have some records of burial places within some of the cemeteries, they don't believe that they have a full record of that. I have asked in terms of financial records, because we all know plots and graves cost money. Can we track it through that? Can we track it through the cemeteries themselves? How many bodies are buried in each of these plots? We really don't know. Now, this is a little bit of mission bleed for this committee, because they're not necessarily from the mother and babies institutions. In fact, the majority are not. However, some are, and the questions remain unanswered. So before I ask, I suppose, members to maybe make comment, because I know you had the papers as well as I've had in relation to the data and the lists, etc. Are you happy for us to proceed to ask those questions, or have you any additional thoughts of how we might proceed to get some more data and to get it in the public domain?
Just, Sinead, if you don't mind me coming in, you have had some preliminary conversations with Queen's?
Yes, it's my understanding that there had been a previous conversation with the previous chair of this committee with Queen's as well. Obviously, for my own benefit, I needed to have that conversation again before I could bring it back to the committee to find out. So yes, I've had one meeting with Queen's. Okay.
And Belfast Union, was that a workhouse?
It's my understanding, yes.
Right, okay, right. Fair enough. No, I agree that all those questions that you highlighted there need to be posed to Queen's, and they need to be completely transparent with whatever records they have, as well as that, you say, the cemetery records, the burial records, or whatever other records are available need to be accessed at all as well, and whether or not the mothers of the infants who are on these lists gave permission for their children's bodies to be donated to Queen's for research purposes. And I would suspect not, but probably didn't know about it. We know of all the other cases that came to light more recently of premature babies or babies who died as a result of miscarriage late in gestation period, that the remains were taken away and there were no burials or anything like that. So this is probably a similar situation. Unfortunately, it's taken so long to come to light.
Yeah,
Anyway.
and I think one of the things as well, Pat, is that when you're institutionalised, your consent is removed as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, it's been able to track the babies. Quite a number of them were like 5 days old. You'll see from the
Right, yeah.
from the report there. So, did the mums die at birth? Did you know?
That's another
there's
question,
no,
yeah.
There's no data. There's no follow through. You know, I'm trying to kind of see if what the follow through, and if they were, you know, are some of the mothers actually, were they in those institutions and they come, you know, so there's a lot of unanswered questions that we really can't get to. Now, for public record, Queen's followed the law at the time. So in 1922 and right up to, so there, I'm not...
Some of these are right up to the mid-50s.
Yes, yes.
1960, in fact.
Yes,
Yeah.
and beyond, yeah. So this has been an ongoing practice. Obviously, legislation and recent legislation in relation to DNA and everything has changed, and absolutely everything is traceable. However, there are serious concerns, and Duffy has brought it to my attention, and I cannot not bring it into the public domain because we need further research, and the emphasis is actually on Queen's. Now their records are scant, to say the least. Virtually I have seen some of the records, and literally time, date, you know, very, very little else.
Yeah.
And that now, as time progresses on, there was more information in relation to the cause of death, etc. But there's serious concern, and also the traceability of the bodies after research has taken place is also a concern, which I think Queen's can do more in relation to getting to the bottom of that. And they too want to be very cooperative in all of this. And as I say, they followed the rules, they followed the legislation. They didn't, you know, we're not saying there, but we do need to know who got paid as well, and where the consent lay. Are members happy to follow the direction as outlined?
Yes, absolutely.
I think we're in an exploration area now, and we'll see where we get to it. Thank you. The third item of business that I want to raise is on the 12th of January, the committee had a briefing in relation to the monitoring report for the Executive Office, and one issue was raised in relation to Meanan Square. There was which is a development in Derry City. 1.45 million approximately was unspent as a result of a negotiation not following through. But when asked, Gareth Johnson indicated that it was imminent that the purchase of this property or this area or land would take place soon. It's my understanding, I've had several meetings with Apex. It has been raised in Derry City Council on Monday night, and a story followed through on the Derry Journal yesterday that there are serious difficulties in relation to the development of this. It's required for social housing. And I have raised it this morning with the Permanent Secretary and have asked him to look into it and come back and report to the committee if members are happy enough that we find what's going on just for this development. Have any members anything to add? Okay. So, final piece of Chair's business is just to remind members at last week's meeting, the House of Commons Procedure Committee indicated that we're visiting Parliament buildings on Wednesday the 23rd of February 2022. An itinerary for the visit is at pages 5 to 6 of the meeting pack. They are scheduled to meet members of the committee for the Executive Office at 10 a.m. in room 115, and if I could ask members to confirm their attendance to the committee clerk. Okay. Can we move to item number 3 in the agenda, which is the draft minutes? Members, the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of February 2022 are at pages 35 to 39 of the meeting pack. Members, if you're content that the minutes are a true reflection of the proceedings of the meeting, I'm happy to sign. Okay. Item number 4, matters arising. Members, the Fair Employment School Teachers Bill, call for views, went live as planned on the 31st of January and will close on the 7th of March. And I'm delighted the clerk informed me that there has been responses already, so that's augurs well. The Equality Commission is attending the committee on the 16th of February to provide a view on the bill, and if they wish to hear or a briefing from other stakeholders at this stage, please let us know. I think the next briefing that we probably want to hear from is CCMS. I think that there will be an important briefing to the committee. Would members agree with that? Yeah.
No bother.
Item number 5 on the agenda is the FIC Commission, the joint chairs of the Flag Identity and Cultural Traditions, and so it can refer members to pages 41 to 211 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers. And can I welcome to the meeting Professor Dominic Bryan and Mr. Neville Armstrong, both from the Commission. Can I advise members that this session is not being recorded by Hansard?
Sorry, Sinead, it is.
It is being recorded now by Hansard, just rule that out. So it is being recorded, and a video of the meeting will be available on the committee webpage. Thank you very much, Neville and Dominic, for joining us this afternoon. Hope we didn't keep you too long in the waiting room there. And I'll hand it over to yourselves just to give us a review and some context of your findings.
Good afternoon. It's nice to meet you. I can't see Neville on my screen, so I'm hoping he's.
Yes, I'm here, Dom.
Okay. Hi, Neville. So what we thought we'd do is I would give a very quick overview of how the Commission came about and the way we worked, and the sorts of recommendations we reached and which we didn't reach, and then Neville's going to talk a little bit about some of the issues arising from that. The members will know that we came out of, the Commission was set up as a part of agreements in the Stormont House Agreement, the Fresh Start Agreement. We were given a set of tasks which broadly were scoping the range and extent of the nature of issues relating to flags, identity, culture and tradition. I might come to that because the fact that the word as big as culture was added to that list meant that our task grew somewhat during the period of time that we were working. Secondly, mapping the benefits and opportunities in terms of flags related issues, whilst highlighting where challenges remain. As I'll come to in a moment, that phrase, where challenges remain, became quite important. And thirdly, to produce a report and recommendations on the way forward. We were set up, I think quite unusually, with 7 members of the major political parties, that you represent, and 8 independent members, with Neville and myself as chair. I'd just make a note because I think this might be interesting. We were described as a commission at the time. I'm not quite sure what a definition of commission is, but of course we had no legal powers in one sense. And I always thought that it was better viewing ourselves as a working group. That might help our discussions in how things then progressed. We also made a decision early on, which I think is significant, and that is, although we were given a possible voting system for within the Commission, we decided that we would be most useful if we worked by consensus. And if you'll take the logic of this, if we had gone to a voting system, we would have ended up quite potentially on every issue with a range of votes that you might find repeated in the Assembly or indeed in your committee. So we didn't think that there was great advantage, and this was agreed across everybody, in us doing that, in just voting for things, but that we wanted to see where we could reach consensus and where difficulties remain. That again was going to have implications at the end of the report. We were set up in June 2016. You'll remember that in June 2017 the executive collapsed. It made our job even harder, and we didn't call it suspending work because we wanted to show that we were still willing to go on. In December 2018, we met a few times between that time to see where we were. We then reconstituted ourselves in February 2020 and worked very, very hard. And I really can't speak highly enough of the amount of work that the members of the Commission put in to reach a report that was handed to the Executive Office on the 19th of July 2020. That report was then published, I think it was from memory, 1st of December of 2021. In that time, just to give you a flavour, I'm told by the Executive Office civil servants that work with us, who, by the way, I thought were fantastic throughout, we had 287 meetings of different sorts. That'll give you a feel for how much work was put into it. And we ended up with chapters on cultural rights, on leadership, on education, on media, on sports, on language, culture and heritage. And then perhaps the area which we were most originally designed to focus on, that of public space, of symbols, of flags on public buildings, flags on street furniture, on bonfires, on murals and on memorials. And we came up with over 40 recommendations, but we also had some key areas where difficulties remained. And I can finish here. That area where difficulties remain, there's a lot of material in there which we think is worth taking forward. So it's not just we couldn't find an agreement. We have put in there where the discussions lay and where the difficulties lay. So I think even, and I'll give you an example, looking at flags on lampposts and street furniture, whilst we don't come to final agreements, I hope that we can move the discussion forward in those sorts of areas. So very briefly, that gives you an overview of where we got to we are at now. And I'll hand over to Neville.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Well, that's good. Can I welcome the opportunity then to present to the committee today? The Commission was an important part of my life for some 4 years. And I had a bit more hair when we started on it, that's all I can say. I live in rural Fermanagh, which is a long way from Stormont. I was determined in a lot of ways that the FICT Commission would not be an exclusively Belfast or a city-based exercise, but rather one that reflected the cultural diversity and the challenging nature of where we live. Out in rural areas, sometimes the impact of our cultural identity is shown in different ways, and sometimes the sectarian divides that are there are more shown through a bump in the road or a stream or a burn running through somewhere, and that can go back for hundreds of years. So it's complex, and we found in terms of our work within the Commission that the further that you dug down, the further you went into where culture becomes toxic, where there's a lack of respect for each other's culture, then that's where issues were likely to come. It was a cathartic process. Dominic talked about 287 meetings. We had 12 public meetings. Some of those public meetings were quite remarkable in terms of the work that was coming out of the tables with AOH and Orange Order sitting for the first time ever at a table looking at their own individual culture and identity. And I remember one night being in Macrofelt just before the council took the flag down, and the impact that that had on a difficult meeting. So these were issues that were in people's hearts and were passionate. We saw that at public meetings here where I live in Fermanagh about memorials that were happening in difficult places along the border, which were still causing hurt, sometimes 30 years later. And we also saw the passion that there was for people's language and identity. And I remember one afternoon spent leading negotiations and consultation in Cultureland down in Derry, and the impact that had in allowing people the space to bring out their passion was quite remarkable. So I think that the report that we ended up with maybe wasn't what people expected. It was certainly, anybody who reads the detail of it knows that this was not something that was lightly gone into. Our discussions went well into the night at some stage, and for somebody that lived over 100 miles away to be there from 9 in the morning and leave at 8 in the evening was a long, long day. One thing that I would say, and I don't know if Dom would agree with me, that surprised me was the good nature and the camaraderie that most of the time was among the members. And you could see people from very diverse backgrounds sitting down and discussing what they had learned during the day over a cup of tea. Somebody I noticed, I think it must have been Alison Morris, said something about, I hope we got a few good lunches out of the whole thing. I can assure you the quality of the sandwiches and the quality of the food that came overall would not have been to country Fermanagh standards by any means. But by all that, I think that we have a good foundation stone for the future. We have something here which, through the Office of Cultural Identity and Expression under the NDNA, is going to have a real opportunity to launch new thinking and new ways of doing things. And I think that if we take the old adage of taking one step at a time and work through those 40 plus recommendations, it's surprising sometimes where the goodwill is out there within the community to see some change. My background was a history teacher, then a community worker. I worked in Peace One, but I've also worked in Belfast. I worked on the redevelopment of Mersey Street for the IFI and worked down in Edgarstown and Portadown alongside some difficult community issues there. I know that by communication, by recognising interdependency, as we have to have here in rural areas in Fermanagh, that there is a positive way forward. And I would commend the report to you as a useful and a thoughtful working document.
Thank you very much, Dominic and Neville. and for your brief and for the background. And I absolutely accept that a tremendous amount of work went into the preparation of this report and the 40+ recommendations, and obviously you alluded to the 200+ meetings and the 12 public meetings, and whilst I could not honestly sit here and be a spokesperson or explain to you what Alison Morris meant in relation to the few good lunches, I think it particularly relates to what we've heard from the wider public of the expenditure of public money in the preparation and engagement with this report, which was extremely substantial. And I suppose the long-awaited publication of the report was very, very important. It was regrettable it took so long to get published, but the disappointment therein lay in the fact that whilst the report was tabled and published, there was no action plan to follow through on the recommendations, as there wasn't any form of joint progress by the First and Deputy First Minister, and subsequently the junior ministers that are leading this. And I don't think it was an observation that was being critical of those engaged and the level of work and the civil servants that worked with you, and I'm glad that you commended them on the work that they too did. It is about the action and the outputs that was required in order to overcome some of the historical difficulties that we have in relation to flags, identity, culture and traditions, and it's extremely important. So I wouldn't minimise or trivialise anything that was said in that forum, because there is a real understanding by the public that they want to see action. And having said that, I just want to say that, you know, obviously there is and there's no point in skirting about it. There is difficulties and issues in the executive in relation to the actions arising from the report. Can you maybe give us an idea of what these issues are? And you know, obviously being in solution mode, what do you recommend that could be done or should be done in order to overcome some of these issues and move to action? Thank you.
I think it's follow up on what you're saying there, Sinead. Firstly, one of our recommendations is an action plan. So we recommended that an action plan was needed as part of the process. We're I suppose in a difficult position now because we're no longer part of the process. I mean, I will go out and on the media, as Neville will, and talk about what we did. But the nature of the commission meant that this was set up by the Executive Office within the Executive Office. So we were independent on it, but it wasn't independent of government. It was really a process within government. And on that, I'd just like to note that the reason people were able to quote the amount of money it cost is because we agreed to have everything put on our website. We wanted to be quite explicit about it. And it's also important to note that the funding for this is built into the Executive Office. So the civil servants were already employed in the Executive Office. It's not as if, so that people are clear, we had separate offices or anything like that. And as Neville said, I can promise you the sparseness of the lunches that we had. And also, and I think this is very important, said the amount of effort put in by people to come to meetings, particularly Neville, and Ian McRae and Donncha McNeilis, who all came regularly to meetings from the other side of the country, deserves for that rural and voice of the West is also very important. But the point we hand it over, it really lies with the Executive Office. And I think the real answer to your question is, taking this forward lies with the political parties. It was their process. It was your representatives as political parties who were on this. I think there is masses of good material in there. I really, as with Neville, I commend it to people. It's not easy. it covers large areas of our social and cultural life. But I really believe that was a lot of work into it, and for now, it's for the political parties themselves, I think, to try and take that material forward. And to be very blunt about it, if you want value for money isn't, in a way, in the producing of it. It's what you do with it afterwards that counts, I hope.
Thank you, Dominic. And just on that, there was a working group set up to consider the issues in relation to the FIC report, and it was scheduled to meet on Monday. Have you any input into that working group?
I spoke with members of the working group, I think, once. I can't remember if Neville was there or not. And yeah. I've spoken to, yes, Neville and I met with them. We met them quite early on. Since then, it's been intermittent. I have to say that the civil servants, the executive officers, have kept us in touch with things just to let us know how things are going. But we do not have any detailed input into that working group.
Okay, so are you saying that you know how things are going, or you really don't know how things are going?
No, I think it would be fair to say, I mean, if you're going to ask me about action plans, I don't know.
No, and nor do I.
Okay, and I know I'm kind of labouring a wee bit at the point here, but is there any part of the report that you think would be good to go, like in terms of action now?
Oh, I don't know what, Neville, you can say if you. I think there's quite a lot of it. I mean, there is, for example, the chapter on bonfires has broad agreement from all of the political parties on changes that could be made in legislation to facilitate safe bonfires. I think, I mean, that was, if you like, that chapter I treat as one of the more successful chapters in the work we've done. I'll highlight another area. We very much felt that our communities become more empowered when they grasp the ability to use human rights, and that rights agenda and the rights, the cultural rights they have, I think is not evenly spread, if I could put it like that, across our communities. And there are places where communities and groups would be facilitated if there was more training and empowerment in the area of rights, and we've suggested that, and I know the Human Rights Commission and others have been involved in that practice, but they're two areas I would pick out as being something that could be quickly enacted. The second probably more easily than the first.
And just on that, I mean, you're talking about human rights and about, you know, cultural rights. So obviously in your work, you have looked probably across the world at some of the best practices. Does any of them stand out to you that you think that might help support the work that the working group is going to do in relation to best practice in other jurisdictions?
Well, I'd say one area which stands out is that of education. That of, particularly in a divided society such as ours, the importance of getting an education curriculum right. And although much has been done in that area, I think as a commission we felt there was a lot more that could be done to have our young people engaging with issues around local identity and culture and history.
Yeah. That was the one I was going to choose, Dominic, was education. I think that there's a real potential there in terms of working with SIA, in terms of working with the Department of Education, in terms of raising the bar towards a common core curriculum in Key Stage 3 in particular, that takes us right through and looks at our early troubles, that looks at the hard issues and begins to get a discussion in terms of, well, this is the potential of what can happen when the society becomes dysfunctional and what it does. And we had meetings with the inspectorate. We met educators in schools who were doing absolutely incredible work in terms of ethnic minorities and how those people were brought into society within the country and all the rest of it, and educated alongside. So I think that that's a bit of a no-brainer in terms of a way forward.
Oh, that's helpful. Can I put John Stewart into the spotlight for a question, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully I'm unmiked and you can hear me okay, Dominic and Neville, yeah?
Yeah.
Great. Great to see you both. Apologies, my Wi-Fi pants today for some reason, so a little bit of what you were saying cut out, but I got the overwhelming majority of it, and I just wanted to start by commending both of you and the Commission for all the work you did. I mean, it's only whenever you talk about the figures, about the amount of meetings that you had and the consultations that you had, that it really comes to light, just the amount of effort that went into this. So thank you again for all that, and for coming along today and to presenting to the committee. There was obviously lots of consultation and discussions and various efforts that went in across the many years that this was ongoing. And I suppose, given the nature of what was being discussed, it was virtually inevitable that there wasn't going to be agreement on everything, given the many complex and difficult issues and contentious issues that were being discussed. And that probably didn't surprise anybody. But I think still that the fact that the report was able to be produced and the great work that went into researching it, the report in itself is worthwhile to have and to show where we're at the minute. In terms of the education, I think that was a point as well, and I firmly agree with it. That was a point that was raised by the Victims Forum whenever some of the committee met with them last week. We were doing a round table discussion on a variety of issues in education and the need for that, either a core curriculum or whatever, popped up again. So it is good to see that theme is popping up. I didn't really have any questions, mainly because the chair took all the good ones and pretty much took what I was going to say. But I suppose, are there aspects, again, and I don't want to dwell on it, but I mean, the negativity around this is that it's the work's been done, it can't be published or it can't be enacted because not everything, so nothing's agreed till everything's agreed. That seems to be the theme. But surely with all the great work that has been done, there are aspects, and you've commented on a couple of them, that could be delivered, given that there is some cross-party consideration in that. Do you believe that it could we isolate parts of the report, or could we say here's an interim action plan based on what's been agreed, or any more thoughts on that?
John, I would say that that's exactly the way forward. It won't surprise people to know that there are areas of our recommendations which I think could be taken forward fairly quickly. There are some which take more time. I mean, if you take the bonfires, for example, if you're going to take through legislation changes, as you people know very well, that takes a bit more time and will take more detailed discussions. And there are some areas where we have highlighted what could be done, but we know that there's more political work to be done. Now, let me give you an example. We might as well go to some of the difficult stuff. You look at legislation on flags on lampposts, all right? And the legislation as it stands doesn't give anybody authority to put a flag on a lamppost. And I use my terminology carefully there. It doesn't give anybody authority. So if you're going to really come to some solutions, including local solutions, as a body set up to look at this, we had to say, look, there needs to be changes. If you want to try and solve this, you're going to have to look at the legislation, because it's no good us saying, oh, this many days and that protocol and this, and we've got all of that material in there. Nevertheless, we can't escape from there's the roads order, was it 94 or something, says you've got to have authority to put something up. So like you all know when you do your election posters. So I hope that people will look, and that challenge that remains, we put in options, can be taken forward. That's an example, if you like, of a difficult area where I do hope that we've moved it forward to a certain degree.
Yeah, no, I hope so too. Do you think there is a danger though, and I'm interested to hear from both of you in this, that like many of the reports across governments here and elsewhere that have been well funded and well researched and well put together by good people, that they end up gathering dust on a shelf in years to come and are too contentious and too, we just don't want to go near that, and it ends up sitting there for a PhD student in 20 years' time to research and say, let's look at what was done in the past and replicate it again. Is there a danger of that?
Who I might well be supervising, yes.
Potentially.
Well, I'll not be supervising them. I think we were given a job to do, John, and we did it. We
no doubt about that.
To produce a report and hand it over. I think it needs that political will there. It needs that leadership in terms of saying things can't continue the way they have been doing, I was very struck at the time of the beginning of the whole protocol protests and the burning of buses in Belfast. Each of those buses that were burnt were £250,000. This is the outworking of where we get our culture wrong. Dominic always talked about culture going toxic, where it's not about being respected, where people don't respect their culture. And that's the outworkings, is where people riot and the public cost is absolutely enormous in how it's done. So there's a huge challenge there, but we've produced the report. There's a foundation stone there to build on. And I would suggest it's the proverbial eating the elephant and eat it one bit at a time. Don't try and swallow it all at once, and you can get through it. And I do genuinely believe that some of the stuff that we're talking about, we're beginning to see it about bonfire legislation and how local protocols are working out in communities, and people realising that it's not always going to be a legal framework. It's going to be about good community cohesion, about being able to communicate with one another and to develop local protocols with the players at that time. And those are the ones that seem to sustain and seem to do best.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Look, I don't want to hog it anymore. I just want to thank you both again for coming along today and for all your work in this, and I'll hand you back to the chair. Thanks again, Neville and Dominic.
Thanks.
Thank you, John and Pat.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Dominic and Neville for your presentations this morning, and of course for the work that you put into this report. And I suppose just to take a step back, this isn't a piece of work that came out of the Executive Office. It was approved by the whole Executive, and the budget for that was also approved by the Executive. So I mean, all the parties voted to have this work carried out. And I suppose, first of all, it must be disappointing for you that there is no implementation plan. And I suppose the narrative often is that, the parties couldn't agree. The parties couldn't agree to get an implementation plan or an action plan published. Well, in actual fact, what is happening, the reality of the situation, and we've heard it here in this committee on a number of occasions, that the DUP are actually blocking the publishing of an implementation plan. So I'd just like to ask both of you, how do you feel about that fact that the work that you have put into this has actually come to a standstill? Despite the fact, as Dominic said, many of the recommendations in the report could actually be moved forward quite easily. Thanks.
Pat, I mean, I've been engaged in trying to solve some of these problems for about 30 years, and I don't intend to stop now, because I think that they're important to how our society runs. They're not the most important thing in our society, by the way, which is sometimes distressing that we argue over these issues when there are other things that we need to do. We recommended an implementation plan, so we would like to see an implementation plan. As Neville points out, and this is I think, the bigger picture. There is a new, I never remember whether it's the Office for Identity and Cultural Expression or the Office for Cultural Expression and Identity. That is part of the plan with the language bills that are going through. And there is also the inevitability of difficulties that will come over the summer. And I would like to think, for that reason, nobody can ignore the work. That if anybody dares put it up on the shelf, that very quickly somebody might want to take it back down again to deal with problems which are not going to go away. I'd be very interested. I haven't yet really found out what this new office, the plans are for that new office. And I'm slightly apprehensive because we have a lot of commissions and offices. So I'm not sure quite where it fits in with the Human Rights Commission and the Parades Commission, and the Equality Commission. And I think that might be quite difficult to define it. Nevertheless, the problems will remain. And I really hope, as Neville puts it, that whenever anybody comes to it, they will treat our work as at least a stepping stone up. And I really do hope that implementation of our recommendations happens as soon as possible.
Yeah, I agree, Dominic. And I think it's what you said in your opening address, that the tragedy would come if there's no implementation plan. That's when the report becomes stagnant and not relevant to people. So I know in terms of my involvement for the 4 years, it was always that what we would recommend would, through a timetable, no matter how long that timetable was, that there would be some actions coming out of it. And I think when people begin to see light at the end of the tunnel and begin to adopt these things, and I think the Office of Cultural Identity and Expression that you were talking about there is the ideal vehicle for taking it forward. And it's a fantastic opportunity for that office to have the report there before it, that gives it the opportunity then to put some sort of action planning in place.
Okay, thanks for that. And I suppose on a more general point, and I know the focus is often on flags and bonfires and things like that, but you know, and I agree with you, Dominic, that it's not the most important issue that we have to deal with. And I can walk through my own constituency in West Belfast and down past the Royal Victoria Hospital and go to my office at the corner of Odessa Street, or the corner of Sevastopol Street that leads into Odessa Street, and on up into the Clonard area at Kashmir Road and Lucknow Street and Benares Street. And I can go on down into town, past into Wellington Place and down into Chichester Street and over Queen Elizabeth Bridge, and maybe come back up the Queen's University and things like that. And, you know, if a stranger landed in Belfast, they would be forgiven for thinking that nationalists or Republicans didn't exist in this part of the world. And I suppose, you know, given what happened across the water in the recent past, in the court case that took place recently about the pulling down of statues of slave traders and so on, and that's not something I'm advocating for here. But in terms of, you know, rebalancing all of that type of, you know, symbolism or emblems or street names or the names of buildings and so on, you know, how do you go about rebalancing that? Do you have a view on all of that?
I do. I've followed it quite closely, Pat, and I've been working. Funnily enough, I've been working on some stuff in Ohio with our friends in America who have got similar sorts of issues as you'll be following in recent years. And what I would say is that with imagination and creativity, one can create change. The irony of some of the namings, of course, is they take on local meanings. So amongst the streets you named in the area you're talking about is Bombay Street. And it would be strange, in a sense, to change the name of Bombay Street, given the fact that the memory of it has a very local meaning. There's a lot to be said about this area, but the one thing I know about the use of symbols and commemoration is that imagination and creativity and recognition and respect can take you a long way. They are often not zero-sum games, all right? And change takes place in all societies. Memorials, all of those things. There's not a memorial that you could actually ever say will never disappear or will never change, because you don't know how he will consider the past. But what you have to do is do it with respect and be creative and proactive on how you're doing it. And in a sense, Bristol gives us the clue. It was probably the fact that they didn't do anything about it which left you with the moment that you got, instead of being proactive in a more respectful way, which I think, looking back on it, I suspect many of the council, I can't speak for them, many of the councillors in Bristol might wish they had been.
And I think also that change is happening. I know when I'm in Belfast, the city centre is a very different place from what I remember when I was at Queen's in the early 1980s. It's a shared city now. Everybody is there. And I think the process of change, I see it here where I live in Fermanagh, that our local community centre in the village now is in English and Irish, and nobody passes one bit remarks to it. So change is slow, and change happens with consent of the people that live there. But you know, it's when it's forced and when it becomes something of a weapon, that's when the difficulty comes, and we just have to let things work their way through.
Okay, thanks for that. And just finally, I agree with you, Dominic, that change shouldn't mean a zero-sum game. And that was why I used the term rebalance. I'm very much in favour of ensuring that people don't feel that they're losing out as a result of any rebalancing of all of those particular issues. So thanks anyway for your contribution today. Thank you.
Can I invite Emma to place questions? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you both for your presentation. I wanted to ask a question around, I suppose, human rights and equality, and I know that, Dominic, you made reference there to sort of the framing of this report in terms of accessing rights, and even in the report itself, it's put in that context around rights of cultural expression and the human rights implications of that. I know, Neville, you've made reference there to Magherafelt, and I remember when the decision was taken to take the Union flag down in Magherafelt. I was reared about 8 miles from Magherafelt, and when my family moved to the area that I grew up in the mid-90s, I'm old enough to remember, and I'm 30 as of Christmas, but I'm old enough to remember when you couldn't wear a Gaelic top into Magherafelt. My mum, one of the first things that she encountered when she moved into South Derry in the mid-90s was the No Catholics Need a Play signs in department stores in the town. So I suppose, I don't know if I would acknowledge hurt on the part of people who were angry about the flag being removed, or call that out as annoyance at the loss of cultural dominance, which is how I would regard it, to be honest. But I think that, in line with my own experience as the chair of the Ad Hoc Committee on the Bill of Rights, the experience that we had when we spoke with people, when we talk about human rights and rights as something that, you know, if somebody else gets a right, that doesn't mean that you have any fear. And when you have that conversation with people, generally they'll come to that position. And I think that's sort of consistent with what you're saying there around people who might have been opposed to the representation of Irish language, but when they see that, you know, that happens and the world doesn't fall in, that's the sort of the way that we have to have that conversation. And I suppose then the annoyance that you have expressed and that others have expressed around the lack of an implementation plan is again consistent with my experience on the Ad Hoc Committee on the Bill of Rights, where we had the DUP engaging in the process at the outset, we have had the DUP blocking the establishment of a panel of experts, and then at the very last minute the DUP submitting a paper in which they said that they no longer see merit in the Bill of Rights. And we know that it's the same here, where they're blocking the implementation plan. So I suppose just the frustration that I can identify here with this work not being able to be concluded properly or not being able to be implemented, and how much you're feeling that frustration as the people who are then defending the work in the media and who have actually been on the ground and had the conversations with groups.
Neville, do you want to?
Yeah, I think the point being, Emma, that in terms of Macrofelt, that we were there on the ground. We had Dominic can remind us, we had somebody arrived at the meeting and told us we couldn't have the meeting because there was a legal reason that we couldn't have the meeting. But as
it was a very memorable meeting, actually.
It was a very memorable meeting. As the night went on, it was interesting to see the nods at the table from, I don't know, AOH and Orange Halls, seeing areas that they agree on and in terms of their cultural identity. But the human rights side and how the potential for that to develop through the Bill of Rights, I think is incredibly important, and it comes back to the education side again, to make that journey and to make that relevant to young people. I think there's a real challenge there within our education system that's not being met at the minute. And maybe it's because the teachers don't understand it either, or it's not important to them. But I take on board everything that was said. I talk about the Protestant village that I live in, Fermanagh, where a girl from Ederney went to the local Chinese with her Gaelic top on, and a group of youth stood outside and wouldn't let her get back to her boyfriend's car with the Chinese because she was wearing a Gaelic top. And it took 3 very irate chefs out of the Chinese with machetes to come and chase them away before she could get back into the car. But that girl was scarred in terms of her rights. And one of the things that we're really we're very cognizant of was in terms of this thing that we have in terms of neutralising our identity, that we somehow remove it into some bland grey-white area that doesn't offend everybody. And I think one of the things about our report was that we were pushing all the time to say it should be that you can wear your Gaelic top into the middle of Macrofelt or to our village or whatever, and nobody causes a bit remarks, or wear your Rangers top to a pub in Galbally if that's what you want to do. That those opportunities come because of tolerance and because of respect for other cultures. We had a strap line that under the radar that we used for the Commission report, and that was respect and be respected. And that was extremely important to us in terms of the agenda that we followed.
Could I just add, and this is really a thought from myself, Emma, about a discussion that we had, and I want to highlight it. But different communities need different aspects of help. That they need different sorts of support in those. And for want of a better argument, I mean, the Irish language is a good example of the sort of rights that people in those communities should have. I've got no problem in saying and supporting that. And I think that the diversity of having all of that sort of stuff makes our society a stronger one. I also thought that a lot of the feedback we got from unionist and loyalist groups suggested to me that they need support in being able to make legal arguments around human rights, that there was a perception there, to be honest with you, that human rights were sort of owned by the Green side. And I really felt that there was, the feedback I was getting, I really felt that there was work that needed to be done there. Not that all communities need those assistants, don't get me right, but it's just an example of somewhere where the right sort of work could empower a community, community groups, I think, in a really healthy way.
Thank you. Yeah, and I suppose what you're saying there has, when I would see that people are opposed, and there is a perception out there, and that definitely came to light as part of the stakeholder engagement that we did as part of our committee's work, in terms of this perception that political unionism or people from loyalist or unionist communities are opposed to rights. But when you had conversations with people from those communities, you found that was not the case at all. And I think that's a massive failing of political unionism, that there has been this scaremongering and this fear factor attached to things like an Irish Language Act or other elements of things that are seen as Irish or nationalist or Republican, when really the extension of rights to one group of people does not, I always say rights are not a pizza. One person having more rights does not mean fewer rights for anyone else. Yes. So that's, I suppose, that's the job of work, and then it's frustrating then that the DUP are blocking us getting the implementation of your findings. But thank you very much for that, to both of you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dominic and Neville. It's been insightful, and I suppose getting back to what Emma said, given rights doesn't take away rights for others, and that's really, really important. And I think one of the things about this report and the recommendations is the real fear factor. There is real, genuine fear of losing ground, and that's why I think that there is a real holdback in relation to an implementation plan. And to the working group, I'm disappointed that the working group isn't working at all, because they've had a meeting on the 18th of March 2021, a meeting on the 15th of April 2021, a meeting on the 28th of July 2022, 2021, sorry, and again in January of this year. That's not enough in order to actually grasp these issues and deal with them, and to deal with them effectively. And I suppose, whilst it's not a major, it's not in everybody's mind at every moment of the day, but it does raise its ugly head in our society every so often, and it's like a cancer that is growing underneath the skin, and it needs to be tackled, because we have other generations that are being infected by this, and we need to draw it out and deal with some of the problems. And as you said, Dominic, the problems don't go away. I have seen these issues last week in my own constituency, where parachute regiment flags were put up, and they were put up to hurt. The purpose was to hurt people that were trying to commemorate their dead of 50 years ago, and they were not put up in response to the parachute regiment or the British government or any of that. It was to hurt citizens. So we've got to deal with that hurt, and that's why I believe that your report is so vitally important, and it is going to be just an expensive misadventure if it doesn't get an action plan and an implementation plan, and it will not do the work of you and the others that joined in that commission for many years, and it won't do it justice. And that's why we as a committee want to see it move forward, and the working group get back to work and do the job that we're all paid to do. So I want to thank you very much for your contributions this afternoon and your contributions to the report itself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, members, just based on that briefing, that we have had. Now, I suppose it's always healthy to remind the Executive Office of the importance of the work itself, of the report, and the importance of the working group, to give it due consideration and meet more regularly and report more regularly on action. As I say, it's just space, waste of paper, waste of time, waste of energy if we don't move in these critical issues. Okay. Are you happy for us to write and reflect that? Okay, item number 6, forward work programme. Members, pages 213 to 217 of the meeting pack is the forward work programme. The Women's Resource and Development Agency have been carrying out a survey on violence against women and girls. It's a very significant survey. It has hundreds of responses already. Now, obviously, it was out in advance of the
Sorry, who's carrying this out?
The Women's Resource and Development Agency. Rachel Powell, I'm not sure if you know Rachel that heads that up, but they're currently doing a survey at the minute. It's really, quite in depth, and as I say, hundreds of responses. So it'd be great to get her in to engage with us and just give us a context of the responses that she has had to date, and it'll inform us going on for the work that we're currently doing as well. So are you happy enough with that?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So item number 7 is correspondence. Members, we've had 12 items of correspondence, pages 218 to 340 in the meeting pack. And the 7.1 is government press release, the protocol on Ireland, Northern Ireland, UK Government in EU Commission joint statement on the 24th of January. We have had communication also from the UK Government press release regarding citizens' rights and the specialised committee meeting on the 24th of January. We have heard from the First Minister and Deputy First Minister in a written ministerial statement regarding the launch of the consultation on the investment strategy on 26th of January 2022. Bugbear, I have to say as chair, but also as an MLA for Foyle, I'm really disappointed again that, the report doesn't directly mention regional economic balance. Despite it being an NDNA, it's no longer can be defined as an oversight, or that it's not in documents. We talk about it, but we don't give it a definition in documents, and I have to say that again. It's just not good enough. Item number 7.4, the Executive Officer's response, an update from NDNA commitments. Again, really disappointed in the response. 9 weeks it took to respond to a letter that this committee sent to the Executive Office of the Department in relation to the commitments of NDNA. We wanted an update, an action plan and responsibility, and we haven't got them. We got a three line response. Now, I've subsequently met with the Permanent Secretary this morning and the senior team to express my disappointment on behalf of the committee. When we write to the Executive Office, we expect due consideration to be given to our requests. We're here to scrutinise the work, and scrutiny only works for government if we're all in it together and we all respond collectively. So I have been assured that a response will be coming within the next 3 to 4 weeks in relation to the commitments in the new decade, new approach.
Chair, yes, I agree with you. It's a disappointing response. And I'm going to say this again, and I'm blue in the face saying this at this committee. This is the DUP holding this up again. We all know they're not happy with the commitments that they signed up to in NDNA, and they're trying to stall the implementation of those commitments. And that's why there's a delay. And you know yourself, Chair, even to have a letter sent to this committee, it needs to be signed by both the First and Deputy First Minister. And the hold-up is not on the Sinn Féin side. And I'm stating that for the record here. Thank you.
I mean, the response to the letter that we sent was 3 lines, and they said, the committee will appreciate the breadth of the NDNA commitments, and we will revert to you with further information later this year. Seriously.
I know, but there's one party in the media calling for these things to be implemented, and there's another party not. We all know who's blocking this.
In the absence of a programme for government, what we have is one document, and we all signed up to come in to these institutions to deliver government on behalf of the constituents of Northern Ireland. And we need responses, and we need to know how things are moving, who has responsibility, and an action plan if things can't be moved on. Yeah. So I had a very positive meeting, I have to say, with the Permanent Secretary today. So we will wait. We'll see in the next 3 to 4 weeks what we do get back in relation to the context, because we're really blowing in the wind here. We spend time every week as committee members from all parties trying to scrutinise government, and honestly, I would get more of a response if I phoned Stephen Nolan on a Monday morning.
Maybe, Chair, what we should be doing in a more public way is calling out the party that's responsible, because we can see the pattern there. I mean, it's been mentioned in the FICT report and who's blocking the implementation plan. It's been mentioned in terms of the human rights, who's blocking that. And here we have again NDNA commitments. The pattern's clear. It's one party that's responsible, and maybe we as a committee should be calling that out more, rather than giving them cover, just talking about, you know, parties can't get agreement when we all know who's responsible. And I think in terms of good governance, I mean, this committee has a responsibility to call it as it is, rather than giving cover to the DUP by using more diplomatic language.
I agree. Unsurprisingly.
I'm shocked, Emma. I'm shocked. Totally shocked there. The one thing that I would say is, you know, this hasn't just happened in this mandate. This has gone on year in, year out. There is a failure from the most fundamental things to move our society forward. And where it's happening again and again, and everything goes back to zero, ground zero. It's been going on for 15 years. Honestly, people are sick of it. I, as a chair of this committee, just actually wonder, you know, what is our responsibility? What is our role? How do we move things forward? We're blowing in the wind. We're getting very little done, very little outcomes, and it's totally frustrating.
Yeah, I know how you feel, Sinead, because, I mean, all my kids have gone to Irish medium schools, and I've been campaigning for an Irish Language Act since my 22-year-old was in preschool in Nice called Brandon. And we all know, again, who's blocking the Irish Language Act, you know? It's not the executive office. It's one party in the executive office. And we talk about the Human Rights Bill, the implementation of the FICT report, and all the rest. The pattern's there. It's clear to see. Let's start calling it out, because it's only when we start putting pressure on, public pressure on the DUP, that we may get some movement from them.
We need to compromise. That's the nature of our society. We need to compromise, and the politics of compromise is the politics that work. And at the minute, it's not working, and it hasn't for quite some time. So I feel it was important to address, you know, just the inadequacies of writing letters. We take presentations, we look at our correspondence, we go into detail and everything, we ask questions, and we get blah answers. Yeah. And
but we know, because you refer there to compromise, and the compromises have been made. We have agreement after agreement, which were supposed to be compromises, and the DUP agree to that and publicly say that they endorse that, NDNA being the last in a long line, and then when it comes to the bit, they don't implement any of.
And we also have to be careful, Chair, that we don't get into the Jim Allister view of the world. Oh, this place isn't working, let's tear it down. I mean, this is the only
I'm
show.
certainly not a tear down person at all. I want it to work, and I think that's where we are at the moment. We are trying to make things work and calling people to account.
But if you constantly say this isn't working, this isn't working, then then, well, it's working in some respects, and in other respects it isn't. So we have to identify the problem and call that problem out. I think that would be useful. But I mean, I don't think this place is going to last much longer anyway. I think the DUP is going to tear it down very shortly. That's the way it would appear. But anyway,
well, we hope
we'll live
not.
with that when it happens.
The politics of hope as well as
Absolutely.
compromise.
Yeah.
So just moving on for that, no, I mean, I've got firm confirmation from the Permanent Secretary that he will come back on that particular issue regarding the update on the NDNA. So point 75 of correspondence is the Executive Office response regarding Maze Long Cash, the Ulster Aviation Society lease. Members of the committee will hear from the Strategic Investment Board in relation to the Maze Long Cash at next week's meeting. 7.6, the Committee for Finance to Secretary of State for Northern Ireland Unique Circumstances Funding. Members of the committee wrote to the Department for details of the Unique Circumstances Funding, including in the New Decade New Approach Agreement. The Department declined to provide the information, stating it was matter for the Northern Ireland Office. Therein, again, repeat. 7.7, Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs Response, Scrutiny of Common Frameworks. So it's ongoing from the various departments. 7.8, Committee for the Economy Response regarding the scrutiny of frameworks, and also 7.9, a response from Finance. 7.10, EU Affairs Manager, UK Delegation to the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, the 26th of January. Members, there is only one representative from Northern Ireland on the UK delegation, Jeffrey Donaldson MP, and one substitute, Baroness Ritchie of Downpatrick. I think she may put on her jersey because obviously Jeffrey Donaldson may no longer be an MP after the elections. 7.14, Federation of Small Businesses, Travel Agents, Coronavirus Financial Assistance Scheme 2021, and 7.12, University College London Constitution Unit, Democracy in the UK after Brexit. Are members content to note the rest of the correspondence? Yeah.
Content, yes, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other business?
None from me.
Okay, so the date, time and place of the next meeting will be on the 9th of February at 2 p.m. right here in room 30. Thank you for joining the meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.